Welcome once again to Musings by Danon. Today we're going to continue our ongoing series looking at different commander archetypes. I wanted to discuss the +1/+1 commander archetype and look at how I build the deck. As I'm sure you've gathered from the video title and thumbnail, I'm going with Pir and Toothy as my commanders. But they are not the only way to do so. Before we get started, please like and subscribe for more content. It really does help the channel. Selesnya is probably the most common way to build a +1/+1 counters deck. You've got great commanders like Leonor, Autumn Sovereign, Hamza, Guardian of Arashin, or Shalai, Voice of Plenty, as well as awesome support cards like Cathar's Crusade, Champion of Lampholt, or Vorinclick's Monstrous Raider. Even new cards from Crimson Vow, such as Sigarda's Summons or Tauren's Fist of the Angels, would be awesome in a Selesnya +1/+1 counters deck. But I wanted to take a different approach. The weakness of a +1/+1 counters deck is board wipes. You spend a ton of time building your board, adding creatures, making them bigger, only to lose them all with a Wrath of God or a Cyclonic Rift. But what if someone blowing up your creatures caused you to win the game? Which brings me to the subject of today's video. Pir, Imaginative Rascal, and Toothy, Imaginary Friend, are a pair of legendary creatures first printed in Battlebond. I love the paired cards that were printed in this set. Even if you're running them in the 99 as opposed to the Command Zone, the fact that you can cast one of them and then tutor out the other one is just great. Additionally, Partner With doesn't try to cheat around the command tax, because the mechanic only lets you search your library. Though partner commanders are generally broken, especially Tymna and Thrasios, the Partner With commanders are fairly tame. Your library is now only 98 cards, just like with normal partnered commanders, but the paired cards only work with each other. Before we get into it, let's keep in mind our checklist. 50 mana sources, usually split between 37 lands and 13 pieces of ramp, 10 pieces of card advantage, 8 to 10 pieces of spot removal, 2 to 3 board wipes, 2 pieces of graveyard hate, 1 sudden I win card. Now normally I try to keep the deck under $100, but Pir and Toothy together are almost $20 by themselves. So the deck is a little over the normal $100 budget, but not by much. At the time of recording, the deck was valued at about $114. So not counting our commanders, we are still under the $100 threshold. I have a Krav and Regna Aristocrats deck that I love to play. Neither Krav nor Regna are very good on their own, but when they're both on the field together they create a solid value engine that tends to scare my opponents. You can just have Regna to create an army of tokens, or use Krav to sacrifice a bunch of creatures to draw cards, but when paired together, you can do it every turn. Just like Krav and Regna, Pir and Toothy work better when together. Toothy, Imaginary Friend is a 4-mana blue 1/1 legendary illusion creature that gains a +1/+1 counter every time we draw a card. Additionally, when Toothy leaves the battlefield, we get to draw a card for each +1/+1 counter on Toothy. Pir is a 3-mana green 1/1 legendary human creature that says if one or more counters would be put on a permanent your team controls, that many plus one of each of those kinds of counters are put on the permanent instead. So it's not a pure doubling effect, but every time we draw a card with both Pir and Toothy on board, Toothy gets 2 +1/+1 counters. The drawback is when Toothy gets enormous. I have won games before by killing an opponent's Toothy and they decked themselves. To counter this, I've included both Jace, Wielder of Mysteries, and Laboratory Maniac. With either of these on board, drawing our deck becomes a win con rather than a loss for us. Now, neither of them is a sudden I win card on their own, but when we pair a large Toothy with either of them, and a removal or bounce spell for Toothy, we can win out of nowhere. That's not our only way to win, though. The easiest way to win with this deck is just to make Toothy enormous, make him either unblockable or give him trample, and kill an opponent with commander damage. So to help with this, we're running Rogue's Passage, Vivian Arcbow Ranger, Garruk Unleashed, and Hadana's Climb. To help put additional +1/+1 counters on our creatures, we're running Vorel of the Hullclade, Deep Glow Skate, Tanazir Quandrix, Give Take, Quandrix Command, Visions of Dominance, and a Hall of Oracles. Additionally, we've got several cards that proliferate in Evolution Sage, Flux Channeler, Smell Fear, Contentious Plan, Tezzeret's Gambit, and Inexorable Tides. We also have a Wizard class, which is insanely good with both of our commanders. Next, we're going to look at payoffs from all the counter generation in our deck. Zamet Guildmage can be used to add counters to new creatures, but we're more likely to use its second ability. Simic Ascendancy is an obvious inclusion here. Ominous Seas and Psychosis Crawler are great in any deck that draws a lot of cards. but our biggest payoff is probably Magistrate's Scepter. With all of our proliferate mechanics, we might be able to take infinite turns with this card. Now, Toothy becomes bigger the more cards we draw, so in addition to the already mentioned Tezzeret's Gambit and Give Take, we have a Growth Spiral, Windfall, Urban Evolution, Explore, Frantic Search, Tolarian Winds, and Inspiring Call. To help us draw even more cards, we're running Teferi's Ageless Insight and Greater Good. As far as interaction goes, we have Beast Within, Imprisoned in the Moon, Commit Memory, both as removal and as graveyard hate, Negate, Kenrith's Transformation, Narset Potter of Veils for stacks, Reality Shift, Pongify, Krosan Grip, and Nature's Claim. For protection, we have Kubris, Harvest Celebrant, and Swiftfoot Boots. I've already mentioned Inspiring Call, but we also have Essence Flux to flicker our commander if needed. And as far as board wipes, we have Flood of Tears and Evacuation. And since we aren't running a ton of blockers, we're a little weak to go-wide strategies, so we're also running an Aetherize. For traditional mana ramp, we've got Soul Ring, Simic Signet, Cultivate, Kodama's Reach, Rampant Growth, Talisman of Curiosity, Farseek, and Sakura Tribe Elder. We're also running a Thought Vessel to ensure we have an unlimited hand size, as well as mana ramp that works very well with proliferate effects in Incubation Druid, Gyre Sage, Everflowing Chalice, and Astral Cornucopia. For lands, I've already mentioned Rogue's Passage and Hall of Oracles, but we also have a Reliquary Tower as our third way to ensure we have no maximum hand size. Along with Command Tower and Exotic Orchard, we're running Yavimaya Coast, Evolving Wilds, and Terramorphic Expanse for mana fixing. Our tap duels include Temple of Mystery, Simic Growth Chamber, Thornwood Falls, Simic Guildgate, Rimewood Falls, Woodland Stream, and Quandrix Campus. A myriad landscape for additional ramp, along with 10 forests and 11 islands. I know we're a little heavy on the blue side, and for those of you doing the math, the ratio should probably be closer to 12 islands and 9 forests. But because most of our ramp is green, I skewed the ratio a little high to ensure that we had green mana to cast our ramp in the early game. So let's double back to our checklist and see how we did. 37 lands and 13 pieces of ramp. Perfect. 15 pieces of card advantage. A little high, but it is one of the win cons for this deck, so that's fine. 14 pieces of interaction. 3 board wipes. Between Commit Memory and Quandrix Command, we have our 2 pieces of graveyard hate. 3 Sudden Eye win cards between Jace Wielder of Mysteries, Laboratory Maniac, and Magistrate's Scepter. Our deck checks all the boxes. This is a very powerful deck that is difficult to interact with. If you are used to more casual games, you might not want to run Pir Toothy at your group. But as a whole, they are nowhere near the top of the power charts when it comes to Simic commanders. So if you want a fun deck with lots of different play patterns, but is still fairly easy to learn, I highly recommend Pir Toothy. Before we finish, let's take a look at some upgrades. Obviously, we should look at lands and add Breeding Pool, Hinterland Harbor, Rejuvenating Spring, and maybe a Bark Channel Pathway or a Waterlogged Grove. I'd also look at Hardened Scales, Vorinclex Monstrous Raider, and a Cyclonic Rift. You could add a Doubling Season, but I think the Hardened Scales will do the job just fine. I'd also add a Rhystic Study, a Spark Double, and a Thassa Deep Dwelling. What's better than drawing a ton of cards from your commander leaving the battlefield? Doing it over and over again. Thanks for tuning in. I've loved all the partner with commanders ever since Battle Bond first came out. Once again, a huge shout out to my editor, Cute Stuff. I couldn't make these videos without her. If you'd like to hire her to edit your own videos, there's a link to her Fiverr page below. Please like and subscribe for more content, and I'll see you all again next time.